Okay, awesome stuff. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roasting Redditors. Today, John and I are going to tackle a few quite interesting profiles. We have a Frenchie who is wondering about a very broad range of MBA programs. We've got a government employee who has been perhaps affected by the recent changes in Washington, D.C. We have a very competitive applicant that's not sure about whether they should do an MBA. And we also have somebody in the media sector, which is a really interesting background, something we haven't talked about before. John, looking forward to diving in.
I am as well.
Shall we start with our first applicant? French looking to join an MBA program, or as Mal has put it in our notes, oui ou non. MBA, oui ou non. So let's go through the background. So they are looking to join an MBA in 2026. So it's presumably going to be a fairly early applicant, probably round one applicant. Interested in schools including NUS, NTU, IE, ESADE, and INSEAD. So really quite a broad range of schools there. Interesting to talk about that. French male graduate from La Sorbonne. I believe that's a very good school in France. That's like Ivy League in France, I think. Media and communications background, though. 5 years of experience in tech with big names on the resume and preparing for the GRE currently. Took the first test 3 weeks ago. Scored a 310. We'll talk about that, I think. He's giving himself 5 months to prepare for the GRE. And basically wants to know whether we have any feedback on his profile. John, where do you want to start?
Let's start with that spread of schools. You have 2 schools in Singapore, a couple in Spain, and one that's sort of Europe, Singapore. What is going on there?
Interesting, isn't it? Interesting. Basically, anywhere but the US. Basically, those are like all the MBA geographies except for the US. Maybe doesn't want to go to the US in this political environment, or maybe is blown away by the costs of an MBA program in the US. Those are all much cheaper programs than US. Could also be a duration thing. I would suspect. Those are all relatively short programs compared to a 2-year program in the US. Any of those could be my thoughts, but definitely an interesting set of schools. Interesting as well that, like, I'd say that it's fair to say that I think that they range in terms of competitiveness as well, right? I'd probably put INSEAD up there as the most challenging school to get into, and then getting easier from there. Would you agree?
Yep, I would say so.
Cool. Okay. So then my question to you is, let's talk about this timeline, which is seems to be a big, he's dedicated half his post to talking about his timeline. My knee-jerk reaction to this, he wants to take 5 months to prepare and then apply beginning of August. John, how does that timeline sound to you as an admissions consultant that's been through this application process hundreds of times?
That's a little bit cramped. You want to think, most folks think about applying to the MBA program only when they have a worthy test score in hand. And a 310 is not the most competitive score. Might have to out here again, but yeah, I don't think I'm also curious to see, and veering a little bit away from the GRE now. It's like he's not sure if his background is helping. So if he works in tech industry and gaming with a comms background, what is his function or role in this company? Because that will also impact how admission committees view the rigor of his work, right? Does he work with others? Is he analytical? But going back to your original question, that's a tough timeline. That's a little cramped. It's a little cramped.
I think 5 months to prep for the test, probably a bit much. I don't know how. I took 3 months. How long do you take to take the GMAT?
That information will remain.
Okay, fair enough. I took about 3 months, and I will I'd say 5 months, you'll be losing your mind after 5 months, I suspect. And then what that means is you're pushing your application, your start date, beginning of August, way too late. You're only giving yourself a month to do the application, and you're giving yourself 5 months to do the GRE. That to me is a bit skewed. I would say 3 months to do the GRE, and then give yourself a couple of months at least to do the applications. For context, when we work with a 3-school package, we allow 8 to 10 weeks as a kind of rough minimum for the time taken. So anyone watching this that's thinking of leaving it to the last minute or the last month in this case, try and start sooner if you can. Okay, so John, let's talk about that professional experience then.
Yep.
5 years of experience in tech and gaming. My reaction to this is I first noted the media and communications background. Immediately when I see that, I'm thinking you're going to need to show them that you can do tech. We've worked, sorry, you can do quant. We've worked with lots of communications people in the past. And the differentiator is, are you working in communication because you can't really do numbers and therefore you've kind of found your way into comms? Or can you do both? And if you can do both, your comms profile will be strong. So it comes back to what you're saying on this tech, the tech experience here. Is it hardcore tech, or is it not so much? Is it more, are you coding, or are you maybe, what's an example of a tech role, John, that is not so quant focused?
Corporate communications, more marketing type roles.
There you go. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean,
so the question is, are you doing a corporate communications role in tech, or are you doing a hard, quantitative coding product manager type role? In which case, yeah, different profile. So focus on the quant in your GRE and overall get that score into, where would you say that score needs to be, John, for these sets of schools?
Needs to be at least a 320. I would
for
say
INSEAD especially, right?
For INSEAD especially, and I would say for the verbal, it doesn't need to be above 160 given, he's French, but that quant needs to get up to at least a 160 for INSEAD. Look, I mean, I think it's in his best interest to submit a strong GRE test score if it is true that his work is not quantitatively inclined, despite the industry he works in. The other alternative is maybe he did well in school and had a strong GPA and did well in his math classes, although I don't know that's the case because he said he's not a math oriented person. And there is no way to apply for a test waiver for these schools either, with the exception of NUS. NUS will consider test waivers on a case-by-case basis. All those other schools in this list, NTU, IE, ESADE, and SIAD, will not take a test waiver. So, nice. Yeah, I would encourage him to get the score up to a 320 with at least a 160 quant, and then reassess from there.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm aligned. One interesting, I mean, French has got to be a positive as well, right? Would you agree?
I would. And especially if he were to be applying to these Asian schools, NUS and NTU are both based in Singapore. What can he bring from his background uniquely that he represents that, NUS would be interested in taking? Like, is he looking to, scale a France-based startup? Can he find a way to add color and diversity to the program? That's what I would focus on. I think there's an opportunity there to play into his geographical, his French background here.
Yeah, lean into it. Align those goals with the French aspect of his profile.
Certainly.
Yeah, I like it. Interesting. Frenchie, if you're watching this, get in touch with us when you've got your GRE score. I think we can possibly help. Good stuff. Okay. Any other comments, John, or shall we move over to the next applicant?
Let's move on.
Let's do it. So this is interesting. Now, overview of this profile. Background, 28-year-old male Indonesian, works in government in the Ministry of Economic Sector. I'm not sure that's what it's called, but in a ministry, basically. 3.6 GPA, broadly in line with the GPA of M7s in the US. GMAT hasn't been taken yet, but is scoring 625, 635 in the mock tests. Hopefully that will crank up by a few points, but it doesn't look like GMAT is going to be too much of an issue. 7 years of work experience, really broad work experience, John. 2 years as a sales engineer, a year and a half in locally, a year and a half in business development in Singapore, 3 more years in government. Just a really broad mix of work experience, which is going to be interesting. I'm sure you have a view on. Short-term goal is to gain more experience in the applicant's own organization. In other words, go back to their own, go back to what they were doing. Long-term, become head of the organization, or transition into the energy sector in Southeast Asia. Target schools, Columbia, INSEAD, and possibly Imperial in London. Okay, John, first thing I want to ask you about is this work experience. 7 years at matriculation. Is that too much?
I don't think so. I think the average nowadays for schools, and I would say the T10 range is, between 5 and 6. I think 5.5, 5.7 is the average over the last couple of years. So an additional year is not necessarily too many. It's a little bit, it's on the high, it's on the high side, right? So that means when he matriculates, he'll have 9 years of experience.
No, it's 7 years at matriculation, it says. So it's only a year and a half or so over average.
Yeah. Okay. So not too bad. I don't think it's a big concern.
Good. What about the breadth of experience? Is that a problem?
I'm reading this, and it is an interesting spread, and I like it in my own way, because you touch on government from a an underrepresented region of folks applying to B school. You have a little bit of engineering experience and in business development. I think all that has, and the way he wrote it is that there's an element of stakeholder management with unique tough parties, which I think can be around a certain goal. It can be around a certain industry. So it's a little scattershot, but I think it's nothing that a good narrative can tie together. And as you know, I specialize in cobbling great narratives.
So let's talk about that. So he said basically his goals are to kind of keep doing what he's doing. That's normally quite a boring thing to read, and it screams like, well, you don't really need an MBA then, because you're already in that company, you're already in that work. You don't really need an MBA to progress there. It's not particularly strong. So how would you consider kind of cobbling together, as you say, these different narratives into a goal that's maybe going to grab the attention of the reader?
Perfectly okay to stay in your company. If you're sponsored, even a bigger plus because you're employed. I think it's not necessarily where you end up, it's what you'll do in that role and what impact you hope to bring. Okay. So if he says that he wants to remain on the board of his organization, transition to an energy sector, and maybe it's about creating entrepreneurial ventures, partnering with different government entities throughout Southeast Asia, building something from the ground up that an MBA can help facilitate, whether it's through networking or case studies or filling gaps in his current work experience that an MBA will help him fill.
Yeah, I'm imagining a career narrative essay that starts with a story of perhaps bringing different stakeholders together, like a really clear example of that.
Yeah.
And then going on to saying, my mission is to enable development in Indonesia by bringing together the different stakeholders that are needed for growth.
Sure.
My short-term goal is to return to my existing organization where I will, and as you say, explain specific short-term objectives within the organization, expand our presence in this particular developing area of the country, for example. Long-term, I want to grow into the head of the organization or transition into the energy sector where I will, and again, bring together different people within the country, bring together different stakeholders. And that way, build a narrative around bringing people together, which
Yeah,
leverages having a very broad experience in engineering, in business development, in government, and ties everything together neatly into a narrative. I think
yeah,
that'd be really nice. I think CBS INSEAD would like that. Imperial
yeah,
as well. Are there
yeah.
any kind of what are you thinking about that school list?
Good school list. If internships aren't necessarily a must, consider J term for Columbia as well.
Great
That's
idea.
you would be interacting with people with a more international class, with backgrounds that skew more towards returning to their family business or having something in place already. And in some cases, the networking there can be a little bit more powerful than the regular MBA program, in addition to it obviously being slightly less competitive to get into.
Mm, yeah,
Um, building on your point earlier, Sam, about the narrative, I think that makes total sense. One to build on that, maybe talk about the issues that he encountered, like when he went into each role, and how he fixed these issues and what he learned from it, and how he
nice.
built on them in the next role. Right. This is what I learned in business development. This is what I learned as an engineer. This is how I built empathy. This is how I brought all of this to government. And this is what I'm still seeing needs to be addressed. And
Mm,
this is how I'm going to use an MBA to advance further, et cetera. All the great stuff
I
that you
love
said.
it. I love it. And then there's an opportunity to lean on specific and mention specific classes within the MBA,
Mhm.
show your research, name drop the professors, perhaps. I really, really like where this is heading. John, client for you there, I think, right?
Oh, yes. If you're, I specialize in unconventional challenges and building narratives from seemingly disparate things, although this isn't quite so disparate, but get in touch if you want to chat more.
And Asia experience and experience in some of those roles as well. I,
Certainly.
if you're watching this, applicant, please reach out to John. Good stuff. I think we should talk about the next profile. Next profile is: am I nuts for considering an MBA? Now, John, this happens occasionally where somebody dives into the RMBA thread with a goal to perhaps massage their own ego by telling everybody how much they earn. I feel like this might be a little bit of a case of that. Um, Not much information apart from compensation is 160K. Trying to gauge if an MBA makes sense. Works, power, and utilities engineering. Um, since I'm just an engineer at the moment, I feel like an MBA would be helpful to move into higher up roles. Don't know if full time makes sense for where I am in my life right now, but I feel that a part time would be good. Now I'm second guessing it. Any thoughts? John, do you think this applicant needs an MBA?
I think the bigger question is, and this is a mistake that most people make, when they debate the whole MBA thing, it's not the MBA is not the goal. The goal is what problems do you want to solve in 5 to 10 years? What impact do you want to have? Where do you
Mm,
want to be in your life? And how will an MBA facilitate that rather than I want to get to an MBA, potentially move up in my organization. Tell you about a time when I interviewed a candidate for school many years ago, and I asked him, "Why do you want an MBA?" And he literally said, "Because my boss told me to get one." Um, and I will leave it at that. But I think there's not much. I don't see any ambition from this person. Clearly, you know, earning a fairly good living. So why I guess I'm not seeing the if they came to the forum and said, look, I'm seeing an issue that I want to resolve. I'm seeing a goal that I want to reach, and I'm seeing gaps that I want to fill. And this is how an MBA will help fill, address these things. I'm not seeing that, and I don't
mm,
think for that reason I don't think an MBA is I wouldn't be gagging for an MBA. Let's
yeah.
put it that way. And
Yeah.
profile, am I nuts? I would just say, the profile's a little boring. I'm not gonna lie.
Okay. So I wouldn't say you're nuts for considering an MBA, but I would say, and I think John agrees, if you're going to do an MBA, you need to figure out the genuine motivation for it. not just as a way to bump up your compensation. A transition to management can be nice and would be relevant. Maybe a career shift into a different sector within engineering, perhaps, might also be interesting. Maybe there's a geographic move.
Yeah.
Currently Midwest, not Chicago. Maybe you have a goal to move into a new geography. MBA could help with that. Whatever it is, you need to really identify a clear reason for doing the MBA that is beyond, as John says, my boss tells me so. I want to get a pay rise. Interesting. Okay. What about the question of part-time versus full-time MBA, which has been alluded to down here? What do you
Mhm.
think the value of a part-time MBA is in comparison to a full-time MBA?
I think part-time MBA tends to be more helpful for those who want to advance in their role, um, and who want to stay in their current job, continue earning their living, supporting others in their family. I think that that would make sense. If you're looking for a career shift, as you say, Sam, whether it's becoming a product manager in your industry, whether it's changing geographies or whether it's maybe joining an LDP, in order to set you on this leadership path, I think a full-time MBA program would make more sense. And his age definitely is more conducive for a full-time MBA program. What I tend to see for people who pursue part-time MBA programs, that they tend to be further along in their career and a little bit older.
Hmm. Okay. So actually, maybe the part-time MBA is the answer. It sounds like if he's just looking for a small, I think we're assuming we don't know for sure, but if they are aiming for a new or a slight bump up in their current company, and there are part-time MBA programs nearby, then maybe a part-time MBA would make sense.
Yeah.
You're still going to need to come up with a really clear narrative for needing it,
Yeah.
but the investment would be less, wouldn't need to quit his or her job to do so. So not nuts for considering an MBA, I think is where we're heading. We need a little bit more information before we could give more info than that. Okay, let's keep moving. So, in need of advice, future perspective, 26-year-old female planning to start MBA in September, 2-year track in the Netherlands, planning my future in the US. So, this looks like an applicant who's looking to use an MBA to pivot geographies. So I'd like to have advice as I've been reading negative comments about internationals trying to get jobs when they have gained their MBA outside of the US. So this is a question of, is a international MBA valuable in the US? I have multiple years of work experience, total 5 full-time employment, college degree in sheet metal engineering, and a bachelor in international studies, so very broad. Looks like doing analytical and kind of operations work in the Netherlands. Boyfriend is American. We're planning to get married soon. Would the MBA benefit me in getting a job in the US? Talks about a personal experience and a toxic work environment and looking to move. Should I do the MBA and then move to the US, or would you say not to do it and just go to the US without a master's? Okay. So, John, let's address this point really clearly. How do American employers perceive non US MBAs?
Um, you're definitely more disadvantaged versus someone who's graduating from a US MBA, and that's particularly because the recruiting cycle is different, right? It's the recruiting cycle favors those who are based in the US, who are based in the US schools.
Mhm.
Um, they have stronger ties to the career offices at these schools as well, and work authorization, right? Most people who go to these European MBA or international MBA programs are looking to build their career outside the US, not in the US. And so for some industries in particular, without a green card, without authorization, it's a bit harder um, to work in the US. So yeah.
Okay. How would you I mean, so I'm looking at this and saying we're planning to get married. Sounds like she's going to marry an American. So I think I'm not an expert in visas, but I think that makes the US visa less of an issue. It's more about the the value of the program itself in terms of the network.
Mhm.
For example, one reason that I chose not to do my MBA in the US was because I sat in on an accounting class with MIT. And the entire program, the entire curriculum was built around US GAAP accounting standards,
Mm.
which is different from European accounting standards. So there was that fundamental disconnect. Oh, I'm not sure this is what I want to be learning. So there is a difference in terms of the content of the curriculum as well. And I think possibly the other factor is the network. If you graduate from a US MBA program, your US network is going to be stronger than graduating from an international program and then moving to the US, where there will be some Americans who've graduated from that program, but nowhere near as many. It doesn't open as many doors, etc. So, okay, in conclusion, then, well, actually, John, there's a few other things. Let's talk about the profile more generally. How attractive, if this applicant did decide to apply to US programs, how attractive would her profile be to the admissions officers?
I think the Netherlands locale is a plus. Um, I don't team management and project leadership helps. I think it's an okay profile. I just don't know enough about this person to be able to make a full assessment. I don't know
Right.
what the GMAT is. Looks like the GPA wasn't listed. I don't know what the post MBA goal is, and what does this person like to do outside work. Uh,
Yeah. So we're
so
looking at sheet metal engineering, Bachelor in International Studies. Doesn't sound particularly Ivy League, but we don't know. And we don't know the GPA, we don't know the grade. I would say that I would back that having worked with a few Dutch applicants in the past, they do tend to be they're an underrepresented group in MBA world. They do tend to be quite well liked by the schools for that reason. Um, I think there's a potential for quite a strong profile there, but we don't know, as you say, we don't know about extracurriculars. We don't know about goals really, apart from moving to the US. We don't know the GMAT status. So I guess without that, it's hard to know. It's hard to give more detail. But Sapphire Green, if you would like to share more information, we would gladly do a follow up and give you more information about your profile. Okay, John, shall we move over to the next candidate who wants a thorough roasting of their profile? Media analytics manager looking for advice. Okay, stats. University is ranked 50 or 7 to 70th, but top 10 for engineering. 3.1 GPA in biomedical engineering. Masters, 705 GMAT, American citizen, Asian male. Experience, major marketing holding company. A couple of promotions in 3 years. Data analytics for a FANG client with a big media spend. Recently moved to a smaller ad tech company with management responsibilities. Has also done freelance consulting. Extracurriculars, volunteer mentor for 11th grade students, active in local squash community. Goals, develop expertise in go to market strategy, deepen understanding of financial activity within ad tech. Build strong industry network. Long-term goal, lead product development or launch ventures in media measurement. Target schools, John, are New York's NYU Stern, Columbia, Kellogg, Yale, and Harvard. Questions. How competitive is my profile? Are there any schools I should add? How can I best address my GPA? Had ADHD? And then any specific aspects of the profile that I should focus on strengthening before applying. So let's go from the top then. How strong is this application or this profile?
the 3.1 is a little weak, but it is not a
Mhm.
it's not the I wouldn't say it's going to tank this, tank his application for application chances for those schools on his list. I think a 705 is a decent, it's I think it's decent enough.
It's
Um,
equivalent to about a 750 in the old GMAT. That's strong, no?
that is certainly strong for sure. Keep in mind, Asian American male. So, you know, scores from those that demo tend to be higher, especially to to NYU Stern, school NYU Stern and Yale tend to be a little bit more stats focused.
Mhm.
I think the rest of his profile was quite strong. I think the ad tech angle is a little bit more unconventional. It's if you can spin it into a sort of like a how dynamic and evolving the industry is and how applicable it is in the age of AI. I think you can cover a pretty strong niche in the narrative there.
Mm.
FANG clients, mention those. Focus on the if you were to focus on the magnitude of his analytical work. Look, I think this profile um, is okay for those schools. I would probably add a couple more T10s in there if his goal is to, get into an MBA program. I think with the ad tech angle, I think Berkeley Haas could be a good one. Obviously, a little biased there, as would some other schools on the T10 list.
Yeah. I've got Chicago Booth in mind as well. I worked with an ad
Yeah,
tech a couple of years ago who got into Chicago Booth. They have a data-driven mindset at Booth, and ad tech is extremely data-driven, and especially if you lean into it during the application process.
yeah, agreed.
Mm. Okay, what do you think about these extracurriculars? It was something that stood out to me. Volunteer mentor for 11th grade students, college prep guidance, active in local squash community. As a when you're reading the MBA application and you see those extracurriculars, what are you thinking, John?
I think it shows mentorship. And look, I mean, squash is a little bit more of a niche sport. But I'm a little biased. I was also a co-captain of a squash league when I
Uh-huh.
applied to an MBA program, and I think it demonstrates a few things. It shows leadership. It shows your ability to motivate a team, and when you're um, standing up for players against a different team, that shows strategy too. And so the schools that he applies to, NYU Stern and Columbia, HBS, and Yale, they'll understand that. I think, especially if you're able to explain the duties and leadership, the kinds of leadership things he did as a
Mm.
as a squash co-captain in the extracurricular section. I think that could be pretty strong. Um, so I don't have any doubts about that. Actually, I actually quite like it. But
Interesting.
effectively, you, Sam, what do you think?
I'm thinking about Harvard Essay 2, the leadership story.
Yeah,
And I think that squash community, if there's a particularly interesting story buried in there somewhere, that could be really, really nice. There's also this story of managing a team of three analysts and talk about that leadership experience. That might also be interesting. So I'm kind of thinking about it from an essay specific perspective. Um, I also would like to ask you about these goals. It sounds, as a non-ad tech person reading this, there's a lot of acronyms in there. It seems a little bit, seems quite well thought through. Do you have an opinion? You've got a bit of a marketing background as well. What do you think about those goals?
I do have a marketing background. Didn't dabble too much in ad tech.
Okay.
But launching ventures in the media measurement ad tech space, product development, I think all those are fair game. I think ad tech is gaining traction, especially if you're able to point to companies like TikTok and equivalent companies.
Mhm.
Um, but look, I mean, at the end of the day, entrepreneurship is a little bit dicey, and I think nowadays, everyone and their brothers, their sisters, and their unpopular cousins are all saying entrepreneurship in their goals, and I fully support these goals. You just have to be careful, and you have to show that you have the entrepreneurial drive to do that. You have experience doing entrepreneurial things.
Mhm.
I don't see any evidence of him dabbling in entrepreneurial ventures already, and so that maybe some. I think I would find a way to qualify that goal a little bit. The
Freelance consulting, that's kind of entrepreneurial, right?
yeah, actually, yeah, yeah,
That's possibly the angle. That's
yeah.
possibly how you could justify the entrepreneurship
Mhm.
goals. I was freelance consulting and I really enjoyed the independence and the ability to drive my own path and implement
Mhm.
my ideas. I want to
Yeah.
build on that by setting up my own ad tech company. Yeah, I could that could work from a goals perspective. Okay, interesting. And then the next question was, are there any other schools I should add to the list? So we've talked about Booth, we've talked about Berkeley
Mhm.
Haas. Okay,
Yep.
how can I best address my undergrad GPA? Right, very common question among applicants. In this case, the applicant has a 3.1 GPA. How can this be addressed?
You would use the additional optional essay for this purpose. Obviously, schools have different varying lengths of that essay. Harvard's is concise, and the other schools have a little bit more room. But you would talk about a number of things, right? Has your transcript followed a particular trajectory? If so, talk about it. Was there a bad semester that cast a pall throughout your GPA? What caused it? Is it adjusting to the program? Is it an illness? Is it any kind of personal or family emergency that you had to deal with? I've seen a lot of these essays during my time in AdCom at Berkeley as a reader. I've also helped my clients explain many of these things, and if it's a reasonable enough explanation, then it will work. If you're
How do
trying
you,
to make things up, then
how do you
it
feel
won't.
about undiagnosed ADHD as a reason?
I think that is a better explanation for a low test score, less so for undergrad, because his test is pretty good. Because the 705 is already established, I think there would need to be a way to explain how ADHD has impacted certain classes, right? Whether maybe it's a class where uh, maybe it's a two or three classes that sort of poisoned the well a little bit, if so mention it. But I think it is a worthy explanation.
Yeah. So the question is, should I mention this in optional essays? And the answer is a very clear yes, including what specific impact the ADHD had on which specific classes, what trend resulted from that. And what John, I think, is saying is getting at here is if your GPA is trending upwards, then that's not, it's better. A 3.1 GPA that's trending upwards might come across as more
Mhm.
attractive. So there's an aspect of the journey, what journey, what trajectory the GPA is having there. And also, I would also add here, I see ADHD as quite a common, it's trying to be sensitive here. It's sometimes used as a bit of an excuse in a way. So I would really encourage you to remove that possibility from the reader's mind. Really emphasize that this is, properly has since been properly diagnosed and
Mhm.
treated, and it's a real case of ADHD,
Yeah.
not something that a cynical reader might say, oh, it's kind of an excuse. So really draw that distinction. And that applies to, everybody who's using a medical reason for a grade anywhere on an MBA application. Really show that it's serious. Okay, good. Any specific aspects of the application to focus on strengthening before applying? John, quite an open question there for you. Any thoughts?
I think in addition to the optional essay, and you said it well, Sam. Look, I mean, if portions of the illness wasn't diagnosed for a while, and that can be a reason why he wasn't sure what was going on, and
Uh-huh.
a clear delta from I was undiagnosed, and this was the GPA and my grades as a result. After this period, I was diagnosed and I got treatment and it got better. I think that can help substantiate some of the doubt that is fomented by a lot of folks mentioning this illness. But moving on from there, I think honestly, it's leadership. I think for Harvard especially, they want to see leadership, and so whether that's through squash or through his experience, freelancing and managing his own deck of clients, I think that's all going to be very, very important.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. I wonder if there's a chance to step up the leadership involvement in that squash community,
Yeah.
organize giant national tournament, perhaps, or some way of really leveraging that, particularly for some of the schools that require a dedicated leadership essay.
Yeah.
If you can, you've got a few months now to really smash that community contribution and really make it stand out. That's what I'd be focusing on.
Mhm.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Thank you very much for the thorough profile. I see masterpiece. That's a really good, plenty of content there for us to evaluate. Good stuff. Right. Let's move on to what are my chances? So, hi everyone. I'm applying to round one this year. Curious what my chances are for M7 or T15. Also had a call with an admissions consultant, and they said I'm a bit old for Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, female international Vietnamese, 29 right now, will be 30 when I start school. Undergrad and masters at a top US public school, 3.98 GPA for undergrad, 332 GRE, 6.5 years of experience at a big four as a manager now. Nothing particular on the extracurriculars, just a leadership role in the company for women's DEI. Any insights are appreciated. Okay, lots to go with here. Let's try and keep it structured. First, John, I want to ask you about the age. That's the first thing that's brought up. Specifically, 6.5 years of work experience and 29 years old, will be 30 when she starts school. Is that too old?
It is not too old. I think even if you're 30, 31 when you start school, I think it's a couple years past the average age of matriculation, but that's been trending older, especially among internationals. So I have no concerns there. Look, we have had thoughts about age before. Um, there are others who disagree. Tell your consultant that to mention their reservations with a certain someone from on this Reddit forum, and we'll bring the popcorn. But 29 going on 30, that's okay. I wouldn't think it'll be concerned, and I think that is your opportunity to lean into the age and to show your maturity, show what you've learned, over the course of the last 10 years working, and how that will be an asset to any class of an MBA program that you apply to.
Yeah. I'm particularly looking at that management responsibility there, right? That's the difference. If you, as a 30-year-old or 29-year-old with 6.5 years experience, you bring big four management experience.
Yeah.
Somebody who's 2 years younger than you, 3 years younger than you, simply won't bring that management experience. So
Sure.
that's your difference. And by the way, for context, if you worked in investment banking, 6.5 years, you wouldn't have any management experience. There's a bunch of industries where you really wouldn't have much management experience at this age, but you do. And that is a really key contribution to the school that they will really, really like. John, let's also talk about academics, just to clear this one. I think
Yeah.
you'll have quite a clear, strong opinion on this. 3.98 GPA from undergrad, 332 GRE. What's the academic land here?
That is strong. That is great. That is great, especially, some public schools have great deflation, the UCs especially, and if you're able to get and they're on a curve, right? A 3.98 is stellar stuff.
Yeah, that's really, really nice. I agree. I think that this profile is possibly stronger than is making out. Extracurriculars, nothing special, just a leadership role in the company for women DEI. Just a leadership role, John.
That is still pretty, it's still pretty great. Look, as you mentioned prior, Sam, I mean, the vast majority of people who apply from Big Four, especially from companies like Deloitte,
Mhm.
they apply as a senior consultant. Most of the people that I've seen when I was reviewing applications at Berkeley, they were consultants or senior consultants. Very rarely do you see managers, and the people who tend to be managers are those who apply from foreign offices globally. And so I think, with the manager title is an expectation that you are more preoccupied with your work. And so admission committee members should be giving them slack based on their seniority at the company. I think the onus is then just to, extracurriculars maybe is not, I mean, it's good enough. This is great. I would also focus on personal interests and hobbies. I think that's where this person can also shine.
Yeah, I agree. It's a classic problem or classic potential issue with Big Four applicants. It's like, what do you stand for? Like, what's your cause? What do you if I read your application, like how do I remember you as? I have a great an anecdote from a client that was a worked in a big four, and after several meetings, we discovered that like the trend. It was actually a couple of years ago when the trend towards automation was really only just starting, and we built an entire narrative around automation of really boring problems. And that it worked so well. It really, really
Mhm.
worked well. So my point is, you're working at a big four. You're at risk of getting lost in the thousands of other big four applicants. What do you stand for? When you figure
Mhm.
out what you stand for, build a narrative around that, an application, a career narrative around that.
Yeah,
Highlight and use one of the other essays to talk about that theme as well. Really bring out what you stand for. And then I would say that as a Vietnamese 30-year-old HSW applicant with a 3.98 undergrad and a 332 GRE with management experience, I would say your profile is pretty damn strong.
it's good.
Nice
Yeah,
one.
I agree.
Okay.
It just comes down to the North Star and what you stand for. I mean,
Yeah.
between us, Sam, I think we've worked with like well over a dozen folks who have applied from big fours, and
Yeah.
that seems to be the recurring theme. People who are successful getting into HSW have a strong story and a strong why.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Good. Okay. Next profile then. What programs should I consider with this profile? Long-term goals in order of favorability, require adequate funding and connections to run a successful startup. So again, the entrepreneurship long-term goal, a leadership development program, hoping to go as high as possible in tech strategy, eventually board positions in cybersecurity, minimum outcome, grow into business manager roles to capture, advise, run tech programs. So it's a very tech focused program. Doesn't have a GMAT yet. Experience is 2 years as an ethical hacker. Ethical hacker. It's quite interesting. Only 23 years old, so fairly young. Latino, if that matters. I'm sure you'll have a view. Total comp, again, mentioning money. Education, bachelor's in computer science, 3.96 out of 4 from a top 40 public school. Published AI research, extracurriculars, lots of cybersecurity focused stuff, skateboarding as well, chess club. Started my own LLC and partnered with a friend in the solar field. We were accepted by Y Combinator's launch program, but the majority stakeholders of the project didn't want to participate in Y Combinator. That's a shame. Okay, pros and cons. McCombs attended this part-time program at McCombs is an option. Tepper would be a part-time program as well, or Stanford, MIT, Harvard, with, as we know, the alumni network and the cons of the full-time program being cost. So basically, this applicant is wondering whether she should apply to a cheaper part-time program at McCombs or Tepper, or a more expensive full-time program at Stanford, MIT, Harvard. John, let's start with a very high-level profile evaluation. How do you see this profile?
I like the angle. I like I think the hacker angle, government ties, the URM background, and that GPA, especially from in a relevant major. I think all that is great. And look, publishing AI, as an undergrad, having the foresight to do so, I think this one has the ingredients to this person has the ingredients to get into a good school, especially if he can nail the GMAT. He or she can nail the GMAT. Oh, he in this case. Um, that's my
Yeah.
read on it. The ethical hacking model. Um, I mean, if you think about hacking, you don't automatically think about leadership, but with ethical hacking, you get into domains where you have to make a lot of tough decisions and bringing people along, these difficult decisions. And I think that in itself is an underrated source of leadership. and great conversation and great narratives. So this is an exciting profile to me.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. There's a lot that can be done with the ethical hacker. I'm imagining, for example, opening the leadership story with at Harvard's application to SA2 leadership. Imagine opening with, if you were faced with this dilemma, what would you do?
Mm,
Or why? And you put the like say it in the like speak directly to the reader and present the dilemma and build on the narrative, build the leadership story from there. That would be so cool. I like this Y Combinator piece as well. It's a shame it didn't come to fruition, but might still be possibility to mention that perhaps on the resume,
yes, absolutely.
or even open the career narrative with that.
Mm-hmm.
Leverage the Y Combinator brand and open the career narrative. So, for example, MIT Sloan, let's say, their cover letter, which is basically a greatest achievements essay. Imagine opening with, I was admitted, or my project was admitted into Y Combinators. Unfortunately, it didn't happen because of this, but here's
Mm-hmm.
what I learned.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
I want to go to MIT. Like, really, it's only 300 words, so you haven't got to write that much detail, but
Yeah.
really just go in heavy straight from the get go with Y Combinators. I think that would look really, really nice. Okay, let's talk about this decision. We've kind of touched on this already today between forking out for a really expensive top tier MBA program versus doing a local part time program. John, in this case, what would you recommend?
Well, first of all, I mean, it's basically choosing where to apply to. You're not assuming you've already gotten in.
Yeah.
But uh, a big part of the MBA experience, MBA program is the networking. And it depends, right? If you know what industry you'll go in and you're there to just upskill yourself, that's fine. But it seems like this person wants to scale his own startup, and that requires a heavy amount of networking, both for funding and to find potential people to work with. And if you are to do a remote program, regardless of the stature of the school, your interactions become less serendipitous, which loses you the ability to build these meaningful relationships. And just it just dampens the utility of an MBA overall. And so outside of how UT Austin, obviously a great McCombs is a great program. I like outside of how it compares to those other schools on the list, I think remote would probably be a mistake here, even though it's a convenient option for him.
Yeah. I think that for most people, I would not say apply to Stanford, MIT, Harvard. I don't say that lightly,
Yeah.
but I think that every other box, apart from the GMAT, every other box is being ticked here more or less
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
this applicant. And so I would encourage, what's the name? Callie Lionbrine to apply to those top programs. I think the return on investment for an HBS and MIT, we're talking about $250,000 investment here. I think for most people or for a lot of people, that is not necessarily an investment worth making. I think
Yeah.
in this case, there is a chance of getting in, and therefore it is an application worth writing.
Yeah.
Would be a favorable investment to make. It's my personal opinion on it. And what I would like to see is to really leverage the ethical hacker with government
Mhm.
contracting story. I think that's
Yeah.
quite a unique angle that, if told in an interesting way, could be
Yeah.
super interesting to the reader. Yeah, you imagine you're a reader that's just inundated with consultants.
Mhm.
A third of MBA, maybe more of MBA applicants are consultants. To
Yeah.
start hearing about an ethical hacker who's like posing as a North Korean agent, can you imagine? Like, what a cool story you could make out of that. I
That
think
would be
I think a top tier M7 MBA program is within reach and would be a valuable investment.
agreed. And look,
So
this person is fairly young too. And it, you know, these programs, especially HBS, MIT, and Stanford, their applicant pool skews a little bit younger than some of the schools in the M7 T10 to T15 list. And so, look, maybe apply to some of these schools in addition to a few other schools on the T10 list, M7 list, the first year. If you don't get in, you can apply again, and maybe your profile strengthens the next year with more leadership experiences.
Yeah. I also think there's a big scholarship argument here.
Yep.
I think the programs would be quite eager to get its applicants on board and would be throwing relatively decent scholarship money at them. So maybe it's not a $250,000 investment. Maybe it's a bit less, and maybe that skews the numbers even further towards a full-time program.
Yep.
Cool.
Agreed.
Okay, great. Callie Lionbrine, get in touch. Awesome. So, John, with that, we're at the end of our roasting session. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much for joining, as usual. I'll see you next week to roast a few more profiles. And if you've been watching and would like to either have your profile roasted, feel free to DM it to us. If you'd like to join us on a roast, there is a free MBAconsultant.com user for anyone who joins us for a live roast. And John and I would love to hear from you. John, thanks again. I'll see you next week.
It's a pleasure, Sam. Next time.
Take care, sir.